The rain pounded down in relentless sheets, a deafening roar that swallowed the scream ripping from Jessica Harper's throat as she slammed her fists against the steering wheel of her stalled minivan. The engine's final sputter ringing in her ears like a mocking farewell, while her two kids whimpered in the back seat, their tiny voices cutting through her spiraling panic. "Mommy, I'm cold," Mia cried, her 8-year-old arms clutching her shivering little brother, Liam, who hugged his soggy dinosaur and sobbed, "I want Daddy." A plea that tore Jessica's heart apart, the raw ache of her husband's loss crashing over her like a tidal wave as she twisted the key again, pleading for the dashboard lights to flare back to life, only to be met with darkness and the crushing realization that they were stranded, helpless, on this desolate Montana highway. Then, slicing through the turmoil, headlights blazed through the downpour. A sleek black SUV screeched to a stop beside them, and before Jessica could grasp the flicker of hope tangled with her fear, the driver's door swung open, revealing Chris Pratt, his face unmistakable even as rain plastered his baseball cap to his head, his broad figure stepping into the storm like a hero yanked straight from her wildest imagination. Her breath hitched, shock battling despair as he strode to her window, boots splashing through puddles, and tapped the glass, his voice breaking through the rain's fury with a calm that made her chest tighten. "Hey, you guys okay in there?" he asked, peering inside with eyes that held a kindness she hadn't known she'd been starving for, and all she could choke out was, "No, we're not. The car's gone, my phone's gone, everything's gone." Her words spilling out in a frantic jumble as tears burned her eyes, blurring the vision of this unbelievable rescuer. He crouched low, rain dripping off his cap, and flashed a grin at Mia and Liam that somehow eased the terror etched into their small faces, his presence a sudden anchor in a night that had felt like sinking. "You've got some brave troopers back there. Let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" he said, his tone easy yet solid, and Jessica's mind spun. Chris Pratt, the Chris Pratt, here, now, talking to her kids like it was no big deal, like he hadn't just stepped out of a movie screen into her personal chaos. She wrestled with the door, her hands shaking as she shoved it open, the cold stinging her skin as she stumbled out, shouting over the storm, "Why are you here? What's going on?" Her voice breaking with a mix of gratitude and bewilderment, because this didn't add up, not the broken van, not the famous stranger, not the way her pulse raced with something achingly close to relief. He pointed to his SUV, already moving to lift her hood, and called back, "I've got a charger and heat in there. Get them inside. I'll take a look." His words a lifeline she couldn't ignore, not with Mia's teeth chattering and Liam's sobs growing sharper. So she guided them through the rain, their little bodies sinking into the plush seats of his vehicle, the abrupt comfort a jarring shift from the hopelessness she'd been drowning in moments ago. Glancing back, she saw him hunched over her engine, rain drenching his jacket, and a wild certainty gripped her. This wasn't random. This was something massive, a meeting of fates that would rattle her world, and she couldn't tear her eyes away. Jessica sat rigid in the passenger seat of Chris Pratt's SUV, her damp clothes sticking to her skin as the heat blasted from the vents, thawing the chill that had settled into her bones while Mia and Liam huddled under a blanket he'd tossed them from the back, their wide eyes darting between the plush interior and the man now elbow-deep in the guts of her minivan outside. She chewed her lip, wrestling with the absurdity of it all. How had her night flipped from a frantic breakdown to this surreal refuge, with a Hollywood star playing mechanic in the pouring rain? The kids' whispers filled the silence, Mia murmuring, "Is he really that guy from the dinosaur movie?" And Liam nodding solemnly, clutching his toy like it was proof of some cosmic connection, their voices a fragile thread of wonder pulling Jessica from the edge of her unraveling thoughts. Then the driver's door yanked open, and Chris slid in, rain dripping from his cap onto the leather, his face tight with something she couldn't read, frustration, maybe, or determination, as he wiped his hands on his jeans and muttered, "Yeah, that engine's toast. Radiator's shot, and the battery's not even worth salvaging." Her stomach dropped, the words landing like a punch she'd braced for but still couldn't absorb, and she blurted, "What do you mean, toast? I need that van. It's all I've got." Her voice rising, sharp with the panic she'd been holding back, because that rust bucket wasn't just a car. It was her lifeline, her only way to get the kids to school, to her shift at the diner, to the life she was barely keeping together. Chris turned to her, his jaw set, and for a moment she thought he'd brush it off, offer some empty reassurance like everyone else had since her world fell apart. But instead he leaned closer, his voice low and steady as he said, "Look, I'm no expert, but I've messed with enough trucks to know you're not driving that thing out of here tonight, or anytime soon. You're stuck, and I'm not leaving you out here to figure it alone." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy and unyielding, and Jessica's throat tightened, her mind racing with the reality of what that meant. Stranded miles from anywhere, no money for a tow, no one to call, and now this stranger, this impossible celebrity, staring at her like he actually cared. She snapped, "You don't get it. I can't just sit here and wait for a miracle. I've got kids, a job, a sister expecting us, and now you're telling me I'm done." Her tone biting, because it wasn't his fault, but the unfairness of it all boiled over, and he was the only one there to take it. He didn't flinch, just held her gaze, and said, "I'm not telling you you're done. I'm telling you I've got a tow hitch on this thing, and I can get you somewhere safe. Where were you headed?" The offer landed like a lifeline she didn't trust, and she hesitated, her pride warring with the desperation clawing at her chest, until Mia piped up from the back. "Aunt Kelly's house. It's in Bozeman." Her small voice trembling but firm, and Jessica shot her a look, torn between shielding her kids and letting this unfold. Before she could answer, headlights flared behind them, and a beat-up pickup truck rattled to a stop. Its driver, a wiry guy in a flannel shirt, his face weathered and sour, hopping out and stomping over, his voice cutting through the rain as he barked, "What's the holdup? You're clogging the road, fancy pants." His eyes narrowing at Chris, clearly recognizing him but not impressed, his tone dripping with disdain as he added, "Some of us got places to be. Not all of us are out here playing hero for the cameras." Jessica tensed, expecting Chris to snap back, maybe flaunt his status, but he just climbed out, hands raised, and said, "No cameras, man. Just a dead van and some kids who need to get warm. Give me 5 minutes to hook it up, and we're gone." The guy sneered, crossing his arms, and muttered, "Yeah, sure, big shot. 5 minutes, or I'm calling it in, and you can deal with the cops." His hostility crackling in the air like static, turning the moment sharp and unpredictable. Jessica's heart thudded, her gaze flicking between the two men, the tension coiling tighter as Chris nodded, unfazed, and started rigging the tow hitch, his movements quick and deliberate while the flannel guy loomed, watching like a hawk ready to pounce. She leaned out the window, shouting, "Just let him do it. We're not trying to ruin your night." But the guy ignored her, his glare fixed on Chris, and she realized this wasn't just about a blocked road. It was something uglier, something personal she couldn't place, and it made her skin crawl. The rain kept falling, the kids fell silent, and Jessica gripped the armrest, caught in a storm that felt bigger than the one outside, wondering what kind of mess she'd stumbled into now. The pickup truck's horn blared, a jagged sound that jolted Jessica's nerves as she watched the flannel shirt man lean out his window, his face twisted with impatience, yelling, "Time's up. Movie star. Move it, or I'm dragging that heap myself." His threat hanging in the air while Chris, drenched and focused, tightened the tow hitch around her minivan's frame, his hands steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Jessica's pulse hammered in her ears, her fingers digging into the SUV's armrest as she glanced back at Mia and Liam, their small faces pale and tense under the blanket, Mia whispering, "Mom, is that guy mad at us?" Her voice quivering with a fear Jessica felt echoing in her own chest, because this wasn't just a grumpy stranger anymore. It was a standoff, and she had no idea how it had spiraled so fast. Chris straightened up, wiping his brow, and called out, "Almost done. Just chill for 2 seconds, all right?" His tone calm, but edged with something harder, a warning that didn't land with the pickup guy, who revved his engine and shouted back, "Chill? I've been stuck behind your little charity case for 10 minutes. Pretty boy, some of us work for a living." The insult stung Jessica more than it should have, her cheeks burning as she realized he meant her, the charity case, and she snapped out the window. "We didn't ask for this. I'm not some damsel waiting for a handout." Her voice cracking with defiance, though deep down she wondered if that's exactly what she'd become. Chris shot her a quick look, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't pin down, amusement, maybe, or respect, before turning back to the pickup guy, stepping closer as he said, "She's right. This isn't about handouts. It's about getting a family out of the cold. So how about you back off and let me finish?" The guy scoffed, climbing out of his truck now, his boots hitting the ground with a thud as he stalked forward, shorter than Chris but wiry and coiled, his hands balled into fists as he sneered. "You think you're better than me 'cause you've got a fancy car and a couple of movies? I've seen your type, swooping in, acting noble, then gone the second the spotlight's off." Jessica's stomach twisted, the accusation landing like a live wire, because she'd thought it too. Why was Chris here, risking a fight for strangers? And she held her breath as he squared his shoulders, replying, "I'm here because they're stuck, not because I need a pat on the back. What's your excuse for making it worse?" The air thickened, the rain pounding harder as the two men faced off, and Jessica's mind raced. Would this turn into a brawl, right here on the side of the highway, with her kids watching? But then the guy smirked, spitting on the ground, and said, "Fine, tow him, but you're paying for my time, hotshot." His demand so out of left field it almost made her laugh, the sheer audacity of it breaking the tension for a split second. Chris didn't blink, just reached into his pocket, pulled out a soggy wad of cash, maybe $50, and tossed it at the guy's feet, saying, "That cover it? Now get lost." The pickup guy froze, his smirk faltering as he stared at the bills scattering in the mud, and Jessica's jaw dropped, the casual way Chris handled it throwing her off balance. Was this how rich people solve problems, or was he just done playing nice? The guy snatched up the money, muttering something under his breath, and stomped back to his truck, peeling out with a screech that left her ears ringing. Chris climbed back into the SUV, shaking rain off his cap, and muttered, "Some people just need to feel like they've won something," his voice low, almost to himself, and Jessica stared at him, her thoughts a jumble, gratitude, suspicion, awe, before she managed, "You didn't have to do that. He was a jerk, but that was your money." He glanced at her, his expression softening as he said, "Didn't do it for him. Did it for them," nodding toward the kids, who'd gone quiet, their eyes huge and locked on him like he'd just slain a dragon. Her chest tightened, the weight of that sinking in, and she realized she'd misjudged him. Not entirely, maybe, but enough to feel a flicker of shame as he started the engine, the tow hitch groaning as it took the van's weight. The SUV lurched forward, pulling them toward Bozeman, and Jessica's mind churned with questions she didn't dare ask. Why was he so calm, so willing to step into her mess? She watched his hands on the wheel, steady and scarred, not the polished actor's hands she'd imagined, and noticed a faint tremor in them, like the adrenaline was finally catching up. Mia broke the silence, leaning forward to ask, "Are you really famous, or is this a trick?" Her tone half curious, half accusing, and Chris chuckled, a real laugh that filled the car as he said, "No trick, just a guy who likes fixing problems when I can." Jessica wanted to believe it, wanted to lean into the relief of it, but something gnawed at her, a sense that this wasn't the whole story, that the night was still holding its breath, waiting to drop another surprise she wasn't ready for. Chris Pratt's SUV jolted to a stop in front of a dimly lit gas station just outside Bozeman, the minivan creaking behind them as the tow hitch settled, and Jessica's heart leapt into her throat when he turned off the engine, leaned back, and said, "We've got a problem. This isn't going to Aunt Kelly's tonight." His voice clipped with a tension she hadn't heard before, snapping her out of the fragile calm she'd been clinging to since the pickup guy peeled away. She stared at him, her hands twisting in her lap as she stammered, "What do you mean, a problem? You said you'd get us there. Bozeman's, what, 10 miles away?" Her tone sharpening with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief, because after everything, the idea of another snag felt like a cruel twist she couldn't stomach. He rubbed his jaw, glancing out the window at the flickering neon sign, and muttered, "Yeah, 10 miles, but my phone's got no signal out here, and I'm not dragging that van through town blind. I don't know the roads, and I'm not risking it with you three in here." Her chest tightened, the reality sinking in. They were still stranded, just with better seats, and she snapped, "So what? We're just stuck at a gas station now? That's your big plan?" Her words spilling out harsher than she meant, driven by the fraying edges of her patience as Mia and Liam shifted uneasily in the back, their blanket rustling with every anxious movement. Chris didn't answer right away, just climbed out and slammed the door, leaving her simmering in the silence as he strode inside the station, his silhouette disappearing behind smudged glass doors while Jessica fought the urge to scream, her mind racing with the absurdity of trusting a stranger, famous or not, to fix her life in one night. The kids breathing steady behind her, Liam's soft snores cutting through the tension, and she twisted around to see Mia staring at her, eyes wide as she whispered, "Is he mad at us now? Did I say something wrong?" The question piercing Jessica like a needle, because she hadn't even noticed how quiet Mia had gotten, how much her daughter was absorbing every jagged moment. She forced a smile, reaching back to squeeze Mia's hand, and said, "No, sweetie, he's not mad. He's just figuring things out, like we are," her voice softer now, though the lie tasted bitter, because she wasn't sure what Chris was doing or why she still cared. The door swung open again, and he slid back in, tossing a crumpled map onto the dashboard. Actual paper, yellowed and torn at the edges, along with a candy bar he handed to Mia, saying, "Found this inside. Guy says there's a motel a mile up, and a mechanic in town who owes me a favor." Jessica blinked, caught off guard by the map, the candy, the sudden shift, and mumbled, "A favor? From a mechanic in Bozeman? What are you, a regular out here?" Her tone half skeptical, half curious, because none of this added up. He unfolded the map, tracing a line with his finger, and said, "Not a regular. Just someone who's been through here before, shooting a movie a couple years back. Guy fixed my truck when I ran it into a ditch, told me I owed him a beer if I ever came around again." The casualness of it floored her. Chris Pratt, crashing trucks and making deals with small-town mechanics, like he wasn't the same guy whose face plastered billboards, and she leaned closer, peering at the map as he added, "Motel's got rooms, and I can call the guy from there. Get your van sorted tomorrow." Her breath caught, the word tomorrow hitting like a brick, and she said, "Tomorrow? I can't afford a motel. I barely have cash for gas, let alone." But he cut her off, his voice firm as he said, "You're not paying. I am. And before you argue, it's not charity. It's me not wanting to sleep knowing I left you out here." The offer stunned her into silence, her pride bristling even as relief flooded through, and she glanced at the kids, Liam now sucking his thumb in his sleep, Mia unwrapping the candy with shaky fingers, and realized she couldn't say no, not for them. They rolled into the motel lot minutes later, a squat building with peeling paint and a buzzing vacancy sign. And as Chris went to check in, Jessica's phone buzzed, somehow alive again, plugged into his charger, showing a missed call from Kelly, her sister's voicemail frantic. "Jess, where are you? I heard about a crash on the highway. Please tell me you're okay." Her stomach flipped, the mention of a crash sending a chill down her spine, and when Chris returned with a key, she blurted, "There was a crash. Kelly just called. She's freaking out. Did we miss something back there?" He froze, his hand on the door, and said, "A crash? Where?" His voice suddenly sharp, his eyes narrowing as he pulled out his own phone, scrolling fast, then swearing under his breath as he showed her the screen. A news alert, grainy photo of a pickup truck flipped in a ditch, the same flannel shirt guy from earlier sprawled beside it, paramedics rushing in. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, the pieces clicking. Had he sped off too fast, too angry? And Chris muttered, "That's why he was in such a hurry. Running from something. Maybe," his tone dark, leaving her reeling as the night twisted into something she never saw coming. Jessica's hands trembled as she clutched her phone in the motel room, the cracked screen glowing with Kelly's voicemail replaying on speaker. "Jess, they're saying that guy was drunk, plowed right into a guardrail. Please call me back." The words sinking into her gut like a stone while Chris stood by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked lot, where her minivan sat crooked under the tow hitch, his silence louder than the hum of the ancient heater rattling in the corner. Mia and Liam sprawled on one of the twin beds, exhaustion finally pulling them under, their small chests rising and falling as Jessica paced, her voice shaking as she muttered, "That jerk could have hit us. He was right behind us, yelling, and now he's in a ditch somewhere." The realization twisting her insides with a mix of relief and guilt she couldn't untangle, because they'd dodged something awful, but only because Chris had been there, tossing cash and towing them out of harm's way. He turned, his face shadowed under the brim of his cap, and said, "Yeah, I saw the bottle in his truck. Didn't think much of it till now," his admission dropping like a quiet bomb. and she whipped around, eyes wide as she snapped. You saw it? And you didn't say anything? We were out there with my kids. Her tone rising, raw with the fear she'd been choking down all night, because the idea that he'd known, even for a second, felt like a betrayal she hadn't braced for. Chris stepped closer, hands raised like he was calming a spooked animal, and said, I didn't know he'd drive off like that. Thought he was just mouthing off, not loaded enough to crash. I'd have stopped him if I'd clocked it, I swear. His voice steady but laced with something heavy, maybe regret, and Jessica's anger faltered, her shoulders slumping as she sank onto the edge of the other bed, muttering, You still should have told me. I'm not some bystander here. Those are my kids. He nodded, pulling a chair from the corner and sitting across from her, his knees brushing the bed frame as he leaned in, saying, You're right. I messed up, and I'm sorry. But we're here now, safe, and that's what matters. The apology hung there, simple but real, and she studied him, the lines on his face deeper in the dim light, the easy charm she'd seen earlier replaced by a rawness that made her wonder who he really was under the fame. Because this wasn't the guy from magazine covers. This was someone who'd just stared down a night as messy as hers and hadn't flinched. She exhaled, dialing Kelly back, and when her sister picked up, voice frantic. Jess? Oh, thank God. Where are you? Jessica managed. We're okay. At a motel. Long story, but we're fine. Her words clipped as she glanced at Chris, who gave a small nod, like he knew she'd leave him out of it for now. The call ended, and quiet settled over the room, broken only by Liam's soft snores, until Chris stood, digging into his jacket pocket and pulling out a thick envelope, sliding it across the bed to her with a look she couldn't read. Serious, almost nervous, as he said, This isn't pity, and it's not a loan. It's yours, for the van, for whatever you need to get back on your feet. She stared at it, her fingers hovering over the paper, and opened it to find a stack of cash, hundreds, maybe thousands, her breath catching as she stammered. What is this? I can't take this. Are you serious? Her voice cracking with disbelief, because it wasn't just money, it was a lifeline she hadn't asked for, and it terrified her. He sat back, hands clasped, and said, I'm serious. I've got more than I need, and you've got less than you deserve. I was out here driving tonight because I couldn't sleep, thinking about how much I've got and how little it means if I don't do something with it. Then I found you. The confession hit her hard, stripping away the last of her defenses, and she shook her head, tears welling as she said, You don't even know me. Why would you do this? He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and said, Because I've been where you are, not the van, but the feeling, and someone gave me a shot once. Now it's your turn. She clutched the envelope, the weight of it grounding her as the night's chaos replayed, his SUV pulling up, the tow, the crash they'd escaped, and she realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, about seeing someone for who they could be, not who they'd been forced to become. Outside, headlights swept the lot as a tow truck rumbled in. Chris's mechanic friend, she guessed, and voices drifted through the wall, motel guests murmuring, Was that really him? Did you see what he did? Their awe echoing her own. Jessica looked at her sleeping kids, then at Chris, and whispered, Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Her voice thick with emotion she couldn't name. He stood, tipping his cap, and said, You don't have to say anything. Just take care of them, before stepping out to meet the mechanic, leaving her with the cash, the quiet, and a future she hadn't dared imagine until now.